Back in January, we welcomed a Dr. Benjamin Schmitt to Beyond the Reefs for an eye-opening conversation on the growing threats to undersea communication cables. At the time, Taiwan had just experienced suspected sabotage off its northern coast, one of several similar incidents involving Chinese vessels in both the Indo-Pacific and the Baltic Sea. Benjamin walked us through the risk posed by these attacks, not just to internet connectivity, but to national security, emergency response systems, and even economic stability. It was one of the first times many of us began to grasp that the seabed isn't just a vast unknown, it's a strategic frontline. Today, we pick up that same thread of conversation and dive even deeper. A new report, Underwater Mayhem, supported by the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy and Perry World House at the University of Pennsylvania, outlined by Benjamin's team, indicates a troubling pattern of suspected sabotage and maritime manipulation by authoritarian states like Russia and China. This isn't just about broken cables, it's about a new domain of geopolitical competition unfolding beneath the waves. Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socioeconomic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world beyond the reefs of this island nation. This report, Underwater Mayhem, features new satellite data, maritime traffic analysis, and first-hand fieldwork at key sites of suspected sabotage, including the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea. Now, the Nord Stream pipeline were built to carry natural gas directly from Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea, bypassing Eastern European transit routes. They became central to Europe's energy supply, especially Germany's, accounting for over 50% of Germany's imported gas before the war in Ukraine. But they were also highly controversial, seen by many as a political lever by Russia to exert influence over Europe. In September 2022, a series of underwater explosions severely damaged the pipelines. While no nation has officially claimed responsibility, many experts believe it was a deliberate act of sabotage. The incident marked a turning point, highlighting just how vulnerable undersea infrastructures can be in modern conflict. It sent energy prices soaring, deepened Europe's rush to diversify away from Russian gas, and raised urgent questions about how to protect critical assets hidden beneath the sea. The Nord Stream sabotage wasn't just an energy crisis, it was a wake-up call for infrastructure security in an era of gray zone warfare. In this two-part conversation, we'll talk with Benjamin about his research, how it came together, what new risks it reveals, and what all of this means for countries like Taiwan, where digital resilience is now inseparable from national security. Dr. Benjamin Schmitt is a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania, where he holds joint appointments of the Department of Physics and Astronomy, the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy, and Perry World House. He's a physicist by training and national security expert by practice. Benjamin's research spans European energy security, critical infrastructure protection, and gray zone warfare. That's a terminology that we'll come to define with him later on in the show. He previously served at the U.S. State Department and helped advance NATO's energy resilience policy. He's also worked at the South Pole, conducted field work across Europe, and remained one of the leading voices on protecting our most vulnerable infrastructure above and below the surface of the sea. Hi, Benjamin. It's good to have you here again.
Great to be here, and thank you. Always great to be on RTI.
So I just want to break things down for our listeners, a little bit of context. How long ago did you start to work on this project, and why did you and your team launch it the way you did, and how did it evolve into what is now Underwater Mayhem?
So, Joey, that's a great question. This has been going on for some time, and frankly, this goes back almost a decade. I left graduate school and became European Energy Security Advisor at the U.S. Department of State back in 2015. And I was assigned the Nordic Baltic portfolio. And 2 weeks after I started in August 2015, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was announced. And basically, my career took a turn towards supporting European energy security and countering Russian malign influence in the European energy sector. And of course, that certainly is part and parcel to energy and national security issues in the Baltic Sea region. And so I've been thinking about these issues for some time. After I left government, I continued to follow these when I was at Harvard doing my postdoctoral work. In particular, published two shorter reports, one at the Jamestown Foundation and one with the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, focused on how Russia was trying to bring to bear Russian flagged vessels after US sanctions had basically blocked Nord Stream from being constructed by Western vessels or vessels with Western technology. In particular, the Swiss company All Seas had left the project after the 2019 US sanctions on Nord Stream. And so was looking at the vessel traffic, looking at how the Russians were basically violating sanctions by doing these sort of activities to continue the construction of Nord Stream 2. And of course, that all kind of evolved into what we see today. And so when I got here to Penn in this new position at the start of 2023, it was in the wake of at least two acts of pretty dramatic sabotage. One, the January of 2022, there was the Svalbard cable cut, cutting of a telecommunications cable by a Russian-flagged fishing vessel, the Melkart 5, in the weeks before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then, of course, the very dramatic scenes that we saw in September of 2022 with the destruction of 3 of the 4 Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 subsea trunk lines of that natural gas pipeline system. And so I thought it was time, because there was a lot of questions about what was going on, a lot of, I think, a lack of technical rigor in the media reporting that was going into a lot of these issues. And so we decided, this is the time to look at energy security from a national security and really hard security perspective, kind of a military perspective. And part of this was because you can't have energy security if the infrastructure itself is under attack, right? It doesn't matter if you have hydrocarbons, oil or gas, or renewables. Any of those pieces of infrastructure, if they start to get attacked, become very not pieces of infrastructure that you can rely on to fend off energy poverty and ensure, by contrast, energy security. And so we started looking at this. And then as what was originally going to be a smaller report was underway, I've done some of the field research for it in the summer of 2023. There was another subsea infrastructure attack in the Baltic Sea, the Baltic Connector pipeline in October of 2023, getting sabotaged. And then there were more and more and more of these incidents. And that morphed into this larger project, which we call Underwater Mayhem, countering threats to energy and critical infrastructure across the NATO alliance and beyond. And it really is a global effort right now.
Yeah, it's a long report, just over 120 pages. And I'm wondering, who do you imagine should be the target audience for this report? Do you see the laymen wrapping their heads around what's going on underwater?
Well, that's a great question. We've kind of released 3 different documents associated with this project so far. We have the full report with all the gory details. And part of the reason it's so long, it's actually not that long in terms of the text. It's more that there's a lot of data analysis and maps and graphics that are a part of this,
right,
and are needed to really make the points that we needed to make. And we'll, I think, go into the methodologies that we use for this report in a bit here. But so we have that. That's basically everything you could possibly want to know about the case studies that we looked at for this first volume of the report series. We also have a policy digest, which I worked on with the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy team, which is basically a reduced length and scope version of the report that is specifically for policymakers. So it's around 3,000 words. It has policy recommendations and analysis that are kind of in a bite-sized pieces so that they can actually be put hopefully into action, both in the United States and Europe and Taiwan and everywhere else around the world. And then finally, we've made an overview sheet, which basically is a one-pager, front and back of a page, that just boil down even further. This is what the project is. Here are our findings. Bullet, bullet, bullet. Call it a day. So you can pick, we have a wide menu of options, and we will be having many more reports and articles and things like this coming out. So it's not just one thing. It's going to be many documents that you can, pick your poison, so to speak, on what sort of level of detail you would like to read.
Right. That's great. So you've considered that we live in the Web 2 world and that attention span is, becoming quite short. So you have different versions catered to people who are on different runs of the attention span ladder. Because this is something that I think a lot of people need to pay attention to. And you're right. With a full report like this, with an academic paper like this, just the citation and endnotes is, 10 pages at the end. But there are a lot of pictures for those of you who are more inclined to look at pictures to understand what's going on underwater around us. So like you mentioned, there's quite a lot of methodologies that you approach this report with, and you've gathered a mix of satellite data, AIS tracking, and field interviews. Now, how do all of these methods work together to paint a good picture of what's going on undersea in terms of the undersea sabotage?
Well, Joey, I think that the bottom line is, look, I come from a physics research background. So data and, imagery and things like that is really mostly what we do. And we combine that with mathematics to get our, for example, in the projects that I'm on with my team in, astronomy, our data analysis focused people are putting together maps of the cosmic microwave background, and they're using a lot of that sort of data. So I kind of had that spirit of astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology. That's kind of what I know, and what I actually am, focused on in physics, or have been focused on in physics, has been experimental cosmology, which is designing, building, and bringing into operation telescopes in northern Chile and at the South Pole when I was doing my postdoctoral work. Looking at the cosmic microwave background. So more in the engineering side of things. And so what I decided was I'm not from a, traditionally a social science background. So we definitely needed to talk to experts. We definitely needed to talk to first responders, but that doesn't tell you the whole picture. And I think that's where the media has, still some homework left to do in terms of how they cover and how they understand and convey what's going on with any of these sabotage incidents we've seen, many of which have been attributed to the Russian Federation onshore across northern Europe, for example. Of course, there's also been arrests against PRC individuals associated with the Pamku Island cable that was cut just a few months ago in the Taiwan Strait.
Right.
And so, the problem, though, is, look, a lot of these media reports are very focused on a couple of leaks. We talked to a couple people who know someone who knows, or they know themselves because they're somehow involved in the investigation and they're willing to say one or two things off the record. That's not enough here, because there is a significant amount of open source data, which is just fact-based data, that is also out there that has to fit that narrative of whatever you're reporting on. And those are facts. And so we tried to basically combine all of these multidisciplinary elements into one cohesive analysis package, meaning bringing AIS analysis of where automatic identification system data showed certain vessels were in the Baltic Sea or wherever we're looking at these, combining that with open source or in this case commercial satellite imagery, optical satellite imagery. In this case, we use the platform Planet to basically back up that AIS data in case some vessels are going dark. And of course, we found some in this report that went dark in and around Russian vessels. We need to have satellite as a backup to say, oh, actually, even though the AIS was off, there was a vessel there. And then putting it together with not only academics and think tank sort of crowd experts, but people that were there, right? And so we talked to first responders. We talked to police on the island of Bornholm. We talked to the Coast Guard in Karlskrona, Sweden. We've talked to investigators across the Baltic Sea region for more of these different incidents. And then we also talked to engineers and technical experts that have done work in commercial shipping, whether they be captains, whether they be people that are super specialized in commercial diving and explosives demolition work for commercial purposes in the Baltic Sea region. We talked to a number of those. We talked to military divers and everyone in between. And so the idea here is by bringing in and aggregating dozens and dozens of these firsthand accounts, expert accounts, technical engineers having their say in looking at how to slice and dice this from that perspective, putting that together with a data analysis, and then of course bringing in results that we're able to assess and verify from investigative journalists and primary source documents like those from the UN that are public and things like this. All of those together are what we used to come to our analytical conclusions in this report series. So I hope that folks that are reading this understand it's a tremendous amount of work, and it's pretty easy to pop off in 180 or so characters on Twitter or a 30-second video on TikTok and throw out there, hey everybody, this is what I think is going on. It's a lot harder and takes a lot longer to get to what I think is a more respectable and analytically sound conclusion. Of course, we don't get to 100%, and we probably won't on any of these. And I don't think investigators, even in governments, will, because they're just so fundamentally difficult when it comes to offshore remote environments.
It's funny that you mentioned that, but if we were to sort of put your findings in a 240 character text on Twitter X, what do you think is the core message in this report that you would really want people to see?
I probably have 2 tweets for you.
Okay.
Case study 1, based on open source AIS data, expert interviews, site visits, and the review of investigative media reporting and related public literature, we assess as highly probable that the Svalbard subsea cable was cut by a commercial fishing trawler, the Russian Federation flagged Melkart 5, and we have a moderate level of confidence in this judgment. And furthermore, experts suggest that we talked to about this, experts suggested that the event may have been a so-called military shaping operation by the Russian Federation, ahead of Moscow launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine that would follow 6 weeks later, because, of course, interrupting commercial satellite data traffic was something that would, basically set the stage and undermine Ukraine's defense, because, of course, Ukraine used things like Starlink for satellite-based internet, as well as geospatial imagers like Planet and Maxar and others to help understand what was going on, help communications, and ultimately help in their defense. And so that's why we think that is a shaping operation by Russia. So that's tweet 1. Tweet 2 is about Nord Stream. And so for this, we have kind of a 3-part idea or conclusion of the ideas that have gone out associated with what folks have been saying may or may not have happened associated with Nord Stream. So first, based on open source AIS and commercial satellite imagery analysis, expert interviews, site visits, and the review of investigative media reporting and related public literature, we assess as highly improbable the theory that the United States military, with help from the Norwegian military, was to blame for the Nord Stream 1 and 2 sabotage. Furthermore, we assess as improbable that a group of Ukrainian commandos operating from a rental sailboat was behind the destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines. And finally, we assess as probable that the Russian Federation itself was involved in the Nord Stream sabotage incidents. And like the Svalbard case, we also have a moderate level of confidence in these 3 judgments. And so those, I think, are the wrapped up in a tweet, maybe a couple of tweets, conclusions that we have here, top lines from this report.
That concludes part 2 of our 3-part conversation with Benjamin this week, with a tweet, appropriately. Next week, we'll come back and discover what are some of the implications and impacts of such sabotage to subsea cables, especially to an island country like Taiwan, and especially for this show, as we tend to discover the socioeconomic influences of what is happening in the world around us. We like to hone in on that with Benjamin Schmitt. But I must add at the end that whatever Benjamin's team found in their report, and if you're interested, you can go online and read about it. We'll add the link in the show notes, is not intending to indicate why these things are done and paint a political assumption, rather that it is probable that's how it happened. Again, like we said, next week as we come back to Beyond the Reefs, we'll continue to discover more about Benjamin's findings in this report, and we'll continue to follow it as Volume 2 of it comes out in the near future. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joey Chow, and this is Beyond the Reefs.